says tayammum is the specific usage of earth, right? Turab, which is earth or soil. And it is used for the face. And as we've understood the face begins at the hairline, or what would be the hairline in the absence of one. So if a person is balding, the hairline may begin way far back on the head. But we're not talking about that hair. We're talking about what would be typically the hairline to the chin, and then from the ear to the ear. So these are the points which define the face, and so this is what is to be understood here as well. And then the hands, the two hands, are to be used in this type of purification. And this, of course, is a replacement for purification with water. It is badala taharati ma'in, something that is a replacement in its absence or if unable to use. He says this is for every case which is used due to a legal inability to use it except for filth on other than the body and remaining in the masjid for need. So here you can use this type of purification of tayammum using soil or earth for everything that you would have to make wudu for, and everything that you would have to make a ghusl for. And you can also use it when there is a najasa on the body, not the clothing nor the place of prayer. There's other means by which, or other ways which you handle those two. So if you are you in a lighter state of impurity, which is al-hadath al-asghar, the lighter impurity, where you would have to make wudu, you can make a tayammum in the absence of water. And if you are in a greater state of impurity, al-hadath al-akbar, then you can also make tayammum in the same way. If there's some najasa on the body, the skin, somewhere on the body, and you are unable to purify it with water, then of course you can lighten it by removing whatever you can so that it's not on the skin. And then you can make tayammum for that cause as well. He says also you can make it to sit in the masjid if needed to. If you're unable to find water, he says here, except for two things: purifying najasa, which is on the clothing or the place of prayer, as is insinuated by what he says, and then also for remaining in the masjid. He says when you're unable to find water to purify yourself, لا يجب التيمم لذلك وهو مستثنى من قوله لكل ما يفعل به. So this is the two exceptions when you don't have to make a tayammum or it's not required for it. Meaning to sit in the masjid. We know that we have to be if you're going to be remaining in the masjid, then there's a certain level of purification which you have to meet, right? So the conditions of this tayammum, he says there are three. The prayer time's entrance. The prayer time entrance is when the prayer begins. So you cannot make tayammum before the prayer begins, the time. And that goes for any prayer that's attached with a time. Whether it's the fard prayer, the obligatory Fajr, Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, Salat al-Isha, those prayers. Or if it's a sunnah prayer that's established by time, like al-Duha or al-Rawatib, the prayers that are attached to the obligatory prayers. Or if you want to make a general nafila prayer, then you cannot make tayammum during the awqat and nahi, like the prohibited times of prayer. You can't make a tayammum during those times because it's not time for any prayer. There's no time that has begun. This is one of the conditions that have to be met, that the time enters. The next condition here, he says, is a lack of water due to being refrained from it or something similar. So you cannot make tayammum in the presence of water. If it's available to you, then you have to use water. You can't choose tayammum. The condition of it is there's no water available, or water is being withheld. that it's been put in a place perhaps that you're unable to reach, or somebody has withheld it and you're unable to go fetch it. Or he says anything similar to this, something similar like water being cut off from you for some reason. For example, there's a lot of situations going on around the world where there could be an opponent, an enemy, which is cut off the water system and you're unable to get to the water. You're unable to access it due to the loss of tools which may draw it out, for example, from the earth or from the well. Or you may be sick. You fear using it. There may be some hardship that comes from using it out of fear. Perhaps you need the water for drinking and consumption. And if you use it for wudu or for ghusl, then you will be left without drinking water. Or anything similar to that. Maybe there's some, he says, physical harm that may come to a person. They may be sick, they may be injured, and using water while sick or injured may either increase their sickness, delay their healing and cure, or it may increase their pain. And so in this case, they should not use the water. Or there may be some financial burden associated with it. If a person is unable to afford to purchase water, they do not have the money to do so. Or the price of water has increased and it's become beyond what is considered normal, a normal increase in price. Today we're buying a bottle of water for $1 or $2. If they charge you $100 for a bottle of water, this is considered beyond the scope of any person to purchase water. He then says, whoever finds water which is not sufficient for purification, right? So you come across just a little bit of water, but it's not enough that you would complete your purification. You don't have enough to make wudu. You don't have enough to make a ghusl. So what do you do in this case? He says here that if you come across a little bit of water, not sufficient to purify yourself, you're obliged to use it. You're obliged to use whatever's present. And you use it by removing any najasa, and then you begin by purifying yourself in the order of the wudu if it's needed, or a ghusl if that's what's required as well. And then you make tayammum with pure, permissible earth. Right? So the reason that you have to use the water is because the condition is that there's no water available. So you have to finish off what's there. You have to use what's available to the best of your ability, and then and only then is it permissible for you to make the tayammum, because the water is no longer available or present. Right? So you give it your best shot. If you can't complete your purification with that water, then you make a tayammum. He says here that you use pure permissible earth. So pure earth is that which is not mixed with something that is najis. There's no filth, najasa, mixed with it. And it is also not mixed with something that would dilute it, if you will, like oats or barley or wheat or corn or something else, some other substance was mixed in it so that it would no longer be pure earth. Also, he mentions the point which is permissible earth. Permissible earth, of course, he's talking about that which is permitted by way of its access. So you can't make tayammum with stolen land, on stolen earth. Right? If you're, he says, بِتُرَابٍ فَلَا يُصِحُ بِمَغْصُوبٍ, like something that's stolen or misappropriated. Like you're using earth on somebody's land you didn't get permission for. You have to use something which is available to you and permissible to use, just like water in wudu or ghusl. Also has to be something that which is not fired here. He says not fired, which is in the Arabic language. He says غَيْرُ مُحْتَرِقٍ غَيْرُ مُحْتَرِقٍ, and this is what he's talking about here, is something that was burned, like a pot. Pottery, you know, when you make pottery, you make it out of earth, and you wet it, and then you fire it. And then when it comes out, it's a hard pot or some type of vessel. And then that vessel can be broken and cracked and can be made into dust. And the reason that this is not to be used is because when turab is cooked and baked and fired, it's no longer considered turab. It is removed from the category of earth now. It is something that has been baked and cooked. So this earth, it has to have dust that will stick to the hand. Right, so this is one of the qualities of the soil or the earth that's being used. It's something which attaches to the hand. And if you're unable to use that, or it's not available in its absence, the obligatory prayer is still performed, not adding more than what is sufficient in the current condition without requirement of a repeat. So if you don't have water and you don't have access to pure soil or earth, let's say perhaps somebody was locked away, or somebody was bound and they were unable to access it, even though it may be right there. They were bound and tied and they could not get access to it. They were locked in a cell where there was no dust or dirt in order to perform tayammum. Then they're still obliged, and this is the nature of the prayer. They're still obliged because that which has conditions is not removed in the absence of being able to meet those conditions. Just because you can't purify yourself doesn't mean you don't pray. Right? So now you pray, but the prayer, he says, is limited. Right? Not adding more than that which is sufficient here. So when a person performs their prayer, while they have not purified themselves, not with the water nor with the soil, and they're praying while in a state of impurity, then the prayer that they perform is as-salah al-mujzi'ah. Just the sufficient prayer. So all of the sunan of the prayer are not done. So for example, a person, they begin their prayer with fulfilling the conditions. From those conditions is Al-Fatiha. The surah after it is considered sunnah. So that's left. And then they continue forward. When they're in their bowing position, they say Subhana Rabbil Azim one time. And the same thing when they're in sujood, one time. And even the tahiyyat, there is what most of us are used to is a sunnah. There's a very shorter version of it which is done. And like that to the end of the prayer without exceeding beyond what is considered just minimum requirement and sufficient for that. And if this is done, you're not required to repeat the prayer even if made without purification. If later on water were made available, or you would not be obliged to repeat the prayer after that had happened. This is the end. He says, وَفُرُوضُهُ مَسْحُ وَجْهِهِ وَيَدَيْهِ إِلَى كُوعَيْهِ وترتيب وموالاة لحدث أصغر وهي بقدر ما في وضوء وتعيين نية استباحة ما يتيمم له من حدث أو نجاسة فلا تكفي نية أحدهما على الآخر وإن نواهما أجزأ ويبطله ما يبطل الوضوء وخروج الوقت ووجود الماء إن تيمم لفقده وزوال المبيح له وخلق ما يمسح عليه. So here the end of it, this talks about the description of the tayammum in terms of how you do it and what it's done for. The obligations of this are wiping the face and the hands to the wrist. Right? So a person strikes the earth. If it is hard, if it is soft, then they place their hands on the earth and then they wipe the face. There are some details to this. This is just the furud. So, just in case you run into the scenario, when you have the soil which has left some remnant on it, some dust on it, then you begin to wipe the face with the tips of the fingers, downwards, so that whatever is attached to the fingers goes onto the face, and whatever remains on the palms is used to wipe over the hands. Okay? So that it's not all left on the face with nothing left for the hands. It says from the hands to the wrist is marked with the bone just below the thumb. This is what the wrist is. So here is the point by which a person stops. The next thing is to maintain a sequence. This is at-tartib, to go in order, meaning that you wipe the face first and then the hands, not the hands and then the face. And then you have a continuation, al-muwala, for a minor hadath. So this is only for replacement of wudu. And the reason that they include these two conditions, at-tartib wal-muwala, which is sequence and continuation, is because the tayammum is a replacement for wudu. And wudu, from its pillars, is that you do it in order and you do it in continuation. That's why it's required if you're making tayammum for hadith asghar. He says here, لحدث asghar. And he did not say akbar. Because when you make a ghusl, it's not obliged to do it in any particular order. So if you're making tayammum for a major impurity, a major ritual impurity, then you're not required to go in order here. Nor, and the muwalat, of course, for the other one means continuation, meaning that if you wipe over the face, you should not let a long time go by before you wipe over the hands. And that time is measured if you had washed your face with water, that it did not dry until you wiped over the hands, based on your calculations. He says, and this is basically what is equivalent to wudu. The next thing is specifying an intent, legalizing what tayammum is being performed for of hadith and najasa. So when you make the tayammum, the intention has to be very specific here. This is unlike a ghusl or wudu. That we know when you make the ghusl or wudu, if your intention is just to remove a hadith, if it's to purify yourself for prayer, obligatory or not, any type of act of worship, then it will be sufficient for anything that comes after that. As for the tayammum, then it's required here because this is not raf'ul hadith. This is not something that actually removes the impurity or the state of impurity, but it is a lightening of it, of sorts. And so it requires, they say, the fuqaha al-madhab, it requires a very, very specific intention to strengthen the weakness of this form of purification. So here he says, an intent for one is not sufficient for the other. Meaning if you made tayammum just to remove the najasa from the body, it's not enough for wudu. If you made the intent to perform tayammum for wudu, it's not enough for what's considered necessary for ghusl. So it works that way. But if you were to make them together, he says, if they were both intended, it is sufficient. So if you intend by the tayammum, this is for the najasa, the minor impurity, the major impurity, and you make one tayammum, then it's sufficient for all of those things. Lastly, it's invalidated by what invalidates wudu. So any of the invalidators of wudu, the 8 of them that we mentioned, this will invalidate tayammum. This will invalidate this form of tayammum for a hadith asghar. And any of the 7 invalidators of ghusl will invalidate the tayammum for a hadith akbar, the major impurity. The presence of water, if tayammum was performed due to its absence, meaning that if water was now made available, even if during the prayer water was made available, the purification is null and void. Right? So let's say we're in our homes or buildings and the water is shut off citywide. The water's off. We went to check all the faucets, we went to the neighbor, we tried to figure out, we called around to see what's going on, if there's water available. There's nothing available. There's no store nearby selling water. It's not available and we have no access. So then while we made our tayammum and we start praying, we hear the sink come on because we left it on. When we turn up, didn't come on. Okay. So we hear the sink come on. Shh, water's coming. Tayammum it's invalid because the water is now there. So your prayer is invalid now. You have to go make tayammum, then you come back. You have to go make wudu or ghusl, you come back and then you perform your prayer like this. And then, of course, you have to understand, when you listen to this type of concise work, the fuqaha, they did not add a word that was unnecessary or leave one out. But everything is very specific. So everything carries some point behind it. So he says here, this is, he says, وَوُجُودُ الْمَاءِ إِن تَيَمَّمَ لِفَقْدِهِ. In its absence, if you made tayammum in its absence, meaning that if you made tayammum because of the other reasons, like you're injured, you're sick, it causes harm, there's some other reason besides its absence, then just because water is made available doesn't mean now your tayammum is invalid. Right? If it was because of a sickness, then your tayammum is still there, your purification is still valid. He says, he says after this, زَوَالُ الْمُبِيحِ لَهُ, that which is permitted it. So if in the middle of your, after you have purified yourself with tayammum, say between, for an example here, from dhuhr to asr, you made tayammum for dhuhr, and then you're in a state of purification all the way until the time is over, and you made tayammum because, not the absence of water, either, well, let's say the absence of water or some type of injury, but in the process of waiting for the next prayer, either water was made available, as we discussed, or the wound healed enough to where it can now become wet, or the sickness was now healed to where now you can use water. The moment that that happens, you're obliged to purify yourself again with water. And finally he says, وَخَلْءُ مَا يَمْسَحُ عَلَيْهِ, removing of what was wiped over. So if you had something, the cast, or something that you wiped over, a part of the body, or something that you wiped over, then by removing that, that also invalidates the purification.